Thanks for joining us for the update to CoachSight in 2026. There have been a number of changes around navigation and a couple of feature inclusions, so we want to take you through those. Check out the thumbnails if you want to jump straight to any of the features that are demonstrated. Let's start off with installation. So you're going to go to your device and open up a browser and then point it to CoachSight.net. And then once we get to the web page, you'll notice a new tile up in the top right hand corner. If you click on the share button and then open up more and add to home screen, you will have now installed CoachSight as an application on your device. This makes it easier to access, but it also enables a full screen mode, so you get more screen space to capture your data. So once we've got that there, click on the new tile, and the app will update to the newest version if it's needed, and then allow you to log in. And then just log in using your email and your password as you normally would have. And then from here, we're going to use a demonstration group, Coal Hill University, and a demonstration season. And you'll see this same season in the Volleyball Victoria site, the Harbour City Tide. Click on the Harbour City Girls selection. And there we go. We're at the home page for the trial. Now, before we progress, anytime you've got a bug or you've got something you'd like to see in the app, you can jump into our feedback tool. And there's an icon at the top right-hand corner of the screen, a little quote icon. Click on that and it'll take you to our feedback site. There's a range of things you can do here, from reporting bugs to making recommendations on features or requesting new accounts. So have an explore if you do need to get some help, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can if we receive those tickets. One of the first things you're going to want to do is have a look at your athlete list. So click on athlete list and it will show you exactly that. Here you can click on an athlete and get some information about them and edit some of that data, which you can't do in demo mode, but in your app you will be able to. Click on the number if you need to change that number, or click on the names if you need to update the names. At the bottom of this little screen, there's a checkbox for clicking that the athlete registration is complete. If we close that out, there are a number of other details in this page. We can add a new athlete. Now, this is something that again is not enabled in the demo trial, but you can in the real trial you'll be participating in. And if we're marking off attendance, we need to select the session that we want to mark attendance for, so it's up in the top of the screen. Click on the session, and now we can mark attendance. You'll see instead of the number of sessions that have been attended, you'll get these check boxes. Now, the main job for CoachSight is to collect data, and this will be where you spend the majority of your time. So click on Collect Data from the Tryout homepage. This will load all of the data, and that can take a little bit of time. And once it's loaded, you'll be presented with a number of panels, and we're going to go through all of those so you know what they do. First up, at the top of the screen, just below the title bars, is an area that's reserved for showing activities, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But the important thing for now is at the very right, there's a button for going to full screen mode. And this gives you a lot more screen space to work with. Down the bottom of the screen is where you'll see some of the data, but for the time being, let's focus up in the top. On the left side, you've got an athlete card, and that shows you the athletes currently selected, along with the ability to go into a couple of extra modes. Team mode is not ready for prime time, so ignore that, but spaces we'll talk about in a little bit of detail in a second. For now, let's go back to athlete mode and focus on the buttons on the right. These are your player tiles, and you can select your players by clicking on the buttons. Once you do that, the first thing you'll notice at the bottom is the overall statistics for that athlete in the trial. And if a tile is orange, it means there's not a lot of data collected. Looking down below at the data panel, you can see the summaries are largely blank, as opposed to one of the green players where there's more data available. Now on the very right there's a filter tab. We can select that button to show the names on those tiles to give us a better idea of who the athletes are, and if there are more athletes than fit on the screen, you can either swipe left and right, or you can use the arrow indicators to move between screens. There's also some little dots on the player cards. They're there for tags, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. As a coach, you can define those tags if you feel like you need to add some information to the screen. Focus mode is a new feature that's been added for 2026. In the top right-hand corner, there's a focus mode button. Clicking on that opens up a little panel where we can define a new focus group and edit its name. And the idea here is that you might have a group that you're interested in focusing on, so for example potential middles, and we want to select a small number of players in there who we can focus on. So we click the edit button, select the players that we're interested in, and click done. Now only that small subset of players that we're interested in will become available and we can focus on them. To show the entire group again or pick another focus group, we use that drop-down menu. Click on Exit Focus to get out of focus mode. Spaces are another feature that have been added for 2026. If you click on the Spaces tab on the left-hand side, you'll see a couple of courts that have been defined for each of your trials. This should be enough, but if you need to add any more, the head coach can add them in the settings for the trial. Now you'll see a drop-down box, and you can edit and bring in players to that court. So clicking on them will bring them into the court. You'll see a little label under the player that says which court they're in. And then we can pick another court and allocate players onto that. Players that haven't been allocated to a court yet will be brought in, and if they have been allocated to a court, they'll get brought to the court you're currently allocating into. Now something you'll commonly want to do is move players between spaces. And we do that by clicking on an icon and holding it, and then drag it up onto another player who might be on your court or some other space. At that point, those two athletes will have changed places. This makes it really easy to move athletes between courts as you're evaluating them. Now, a little trick is you can't see any of the data that we want to collect unless you've selected a session. So that's not visible in full screen mode. We're going to go out of full screen, select a session, and then drop back into full screen mode. And now we can see the data controls that we're used to, including the averages in those little circles and the sliders that we use to make our own evaluations. Important to note at the moment is that we're currently looking at the averages and the scores at the session level. We can dive into a little more detail using the activities in the top bar. Now, one of the most useful aspects of CoachSight is that as other coaches are providing detail, a whole lot is going to change on the screen. So as we sit here watching Hazel, you'll notice that some of these averages are going to change as other coaches are providing data on Hazel. And then of course we can go in and make our own observations, and you'll notice that those averages all change in real time as well. That'll get reflected across the entire coach base. We briefly mentioned activities a little bit earlier, and here's where they come into play. I can select an activity across the top, so that's like the drills in your session, and all my scores go back to 0. That's because we can now score an individual against how they perform in an activity, and that'll roll up into the average for the session. So when we flick back to the session by clicking on that activity once again, all of the averages change, and my individual contributions at a session level go back to what they were. Now, those activity scores I just set are saved in the activity. Now we can collect other information on the athlete as well, such as some of the attributes they have, so standing reach or dominant hand. We can make some general comments about that athlete. We can have a look at an analysis of multiple athletes at the same time to see how they compare across the different skill sets. And you can select up to 5 at a time for this. We can also make team recommendations. So later on in the trials, you might select players or you suggest players for a team. But early on in a trial, you might just be looking at who are you not going to make an offer to, or who are you going to recall into the next trial. And if CoachSight has been used for athletes to register, or you've imported the questions that you've collected on your external system, they can become available here in the application data so that you can get an idea of how athletes have responded to those questions. The last thing we'll look at is the filters. If you're wondering where some of your athletes are, it could be because they've been filtered out. The two most common ones are athletes who have incomplete registrations or athletes who are absent. So you may want to check those to bring those athletes back into view. The other common reason athletes might not be visible is the AI filter. This filter, when it's applied, hides players that you've collected enough data on. And you can see here we've gone down to 3 players instead of 4. If I go back into the Filters tab, I can turn off the AI filter and those players will come back into view. Now if we go out of Spaces mode, so we'll go and click on the Athlete tab at the top left there, we can see here that the filters are showing us that there are a large number of players that have been hidden, nearly half of the cohort at the moment. And at the top we can see 11 trialists have been hidden by the AI filtering. So that just keeps us aware of why we might not be seeing people. There's also a little info button at the top on the activities that give us some information about that particular activity. Coaches can define that in the setups. That's it for the summary of features in the 2026 update for CoachSight. I hope that's been useful. There'll be another video showing some more information about how team recommendations and selections occur, and another video later also for head coaches about the sorts of things you can edit in a trial. Happy trialing, and remember, lose the paper and win the game with CoachSight.